Okay, she's done. So we will get started with today's webinar event. As I mentioned earlier, today's conversation is going to be about forging successful partnerships in financial empowerment. And we're excited to have this conversation be facilitated for us by our friends and field experts at Prosperity Now, and you'll hear a little bit more about them in just a minute. So I wanted to introduce you to the other members of the LCRC team. We couldn't do this work if we didn't work so well together as a team. I already introduced myself, Hyacinth, but we're led in our efforts by Tiffany Marley, who is the project director, and Jarl Crocker, who is the director of training and technical assistance. We're very honored to have Jeannie Chaffin joining us, former OCS director, and she's working with us primarily on our whole family approach work. My wonderful colleague, Courtney Kohler, who is our senior associate for TNTA, Liza Porras, excuse me, who's also a program associate for our department, and Charity Frankowski, who actually recently finished up her placement as an AmeriCorps Vista volunteer with us on our rural impact work, but she's still here with us working in some more administrative capacities here in the partnership, but you'll probably hear from her from time to time if you haven't already. So this is our lovely team. And as we do so with all of our web events, we like to recite the promise of community action together because it grounds us in our work, regardless of the different topics that we focus on or the different projects that we work on across the country. This is the thing that brings us together every day. And it states that community action changes people's lives, embodies the spirit of hope, improves communities, and makes America a better place to live. We care about the entire community, and we are dedicated to helping people help themselves and each other. So a little bit about our project. If you don't know about it, the Learning Community, basically the purpose of our project is to identify effective and promising practice models for you all out there in the field, and you can see kind of it summarized there in bold on the screen. Basically what we do on our project is we work with members of our network to help identify these promising practices to help you all build your capacity to fight poverty more effectively in your communities. And this is of critical importance because many of the various focus areas that we look at and study here in the learning community are reflected here on our network theory of change, thinking about especially that middle section of services and strategies. What are your organizations doing in that space, and how can you be better so that we can ultimately reach the 3 goals that we see on the top for our agencies, our families, and our communities across the United States? And we think that's very important. So here are the focus areas of the learning community. We offer webinar presentations and learning opportunities and engagements really in all of these focus areas, but our conversation today is really going to focus on one of our intensive learning community groups, our Financial Empowerment for Families group that I facilitate, and I'm really happy to be working with the team at Prosperity Now in this effort to help agencies think about holistic and intentional financial empowerment strategies that they can utilize and leverage across all levels of their organization. And despite our different focus areas, you saw there was quite a list there. One thing that was really important to us in this cohort was we wanted to make sure that we embedded some key topics that regardless of the focus area, these are things that are important to our network. You can see here racial equity, being trauma-informed, especially thinking about those 2 things in our conversation today. How you can work with partners in your communities to make sure that those 2 things are a really important and grounded piece of the work that you're doing with families. Data collection, ROMA, of course, MPI, data analysis. All of those different pieces together, they kind of play out in different ways across these various topic areas, and we wanted to make sure that we provide you all with kind of a perspective on how all of these pieces are important and how they might change or shift based on the focus area of your work. So a little bit about the scope of the learning community. You can see we're happy to report that we have participation across all 11 regions, and that collectively membership in our learning community reaches 407 counties across the United States, from rural to urban, red to blue. We are pretty much there doing it all. And collectively, those agencies served over 1.5 million people last year. So think of the impact that we could potentially have through this work, through providing you all with information about these promising practice models. The way we like to think about it here in our office is thinking about if we can just get a bunch of you guys, and us too, thinking about some of those small steps that we can make together, but we get a lot of people doing it that can really result in some big change in our communities on the local level, but also nationally to improve outcomes for families and communities. So without further ado, I'm going to turn our presentation today into the more than capable hands of our presenter, Carmen Shorter. She is a senior manager at Prosperity Now in their field engagement team. I hope I got that right, Carmen, but we're really excited to have her come back. This is her third webinar with us talking about various aspects of financial empowerment, and she's going to lead us in this conversation today. So Carmen, whenever you're ready, you can go ahead.
Thank you so much, Hyacinth. And yes, you got it right. My name is Carmen Shorter, and I'm a Senior Manager for Learning at the Field Engagement Team here at Prosperity Now. And it's really a pleasure to join all of you again for another webinar, especially because we get to talk about financial empowerment and financial capability within the context of the promise and premise of community action partnership. And as Hyacinth mentioned, during today's conversation, I do encourage you all to reflect on the way that partnerships and your approach to financial empowerment can be grounded in the principles of trauma-informed service design, a structural analysis about the issues facing low and moderate income households, and the community level work that you're tasked with, even as you're working with families and individuals. So if you have any questions during today's conversation, if you have any insights, please do share those with us in the chat box so we can keep this at a community conversation level. So for those of you who might be new to the work of Prosperity Now, we work to ensure that everyone in the country has a clear path to financial stability, wealth, and prosperity. Now, we don't mean Beyonce level wealth, right? We're not talking about prosperity that allows you to simply coast along with all the resources on your side. What we're talking about here are dismantling some of the barriers to financial stability, ensuring people have some financial mobility and an ability to move beyond some of the conditions that may have kept generations locked in cycles of debt and despair. And we do this work through community partners like yourselves. We interface with both policy advocacy and program design, evaluation, and implementation. So again, if you haven't heard of us, do check out our website. If you have heard of us before, it might have been under our previous name, CFED. So a little background on us. So about today's conversation, really want to make this interactive. We are going to explore the power and promise of partnerships in financial empowerment, particularly from the community perspective. So we're going to just quickly touch on the power of partnerships in financial empowerment. Then we're going to explore some of the tools available through our integration planning guide. We talked about this in our first webinar with you all earlier in the series. So I'll just give you a quick overview of some of the tools that are available to help people identify what sort of services might be available, what sort of partnerships could be considered. So we're going to look at the assessing of potential partners, identifying opportunities for partnership, and how to establish a partnership plan so that you have a strategy where both organizations are getting their needs met. Then we're going to hear from some of my colleagues at Prosperity Now, some insights from technical assistance projects that we've done with field partners. And we're going to look at a specific type of financial empowerment partnership through volunteer income tax preparation, or VITA, and how VITA services can be a way for especially CAAs to look at community-level financial empowerment. We're going to make sure we leave a lot of time for you all to share your insights and questions with us, and then we'll close things out. So I hope that sounds as good to you as it does to us. And again, here are my colleagues who will join us a little bit later today. We'll be hearing from Kiba Varun, who's the Senior Program Manager on our Savings and Financial Capability team, brings a lot of expertise from financial coaching and social and economic justice work. And we'll also hear from our colleague, Rebecca Thompson, who's Project Director with the Taxpayer Opportunity Network, which is a VITA or Community Tax Preparation network of at least 1,600 different programs. So again, the power of partnerships in financial empowerment. I wanted to sort of take a moment and reflect. Think about what we what we sort of design as model financial capability integration programs. So consider a workforce development agency that provides access to credit counseling services to boost client credit scores, or maybe a housing agency that provides budget management to help clients manage their finances, and also links those clients to an IDA, or an individual development account, also known as a matched savings account, so that those folks who are aspiring homeowners can start saving now for a down payment. What about a food pantry that actually offers financial counseling for folks who repeatedly tap into their emergency food services? Or maybe a local asset building group, a group of separate organizations that have come together to offer multiple types of services in one location. And with this, I wanted to consider how can strategic partnerships strengthen service relevance, reach, and impact for mission-driven organizations. I put it this way because for a lot of people, the idea of adding on additional services to an already packed set of services for clients that have multiple needs, and it's not like we're talking about a whole lot of additional resources to do this work. Partnerships are one way that organizations can avoid feeling overburdened trying to meet the needs of their clients, and a way to share resources and share mission strategies. Even if your even if your approach is different, you can share values, you can share your mission by bringing together different resources, bringing together different strengths to serve the same community through different pathways. So we talked about this in our first webinar, so I don't want to spend too much time, but I just want to help you all consider the type of program integration we're talking about is often supported through partnership. There are other ways we're going to touch on lightly, but want to consider how partnerships are a way to strengthen that work. So from the integration guide, these are 3 approaches to integrating financial capability or financial empowerment services. The first is do it yourself, which is having in-house services staff in your own organization providing additional financial capability services within your existing service milieu. You could also look at referrals, where you are sending clients out sort of external to your own organization to become clients at another organization with varying levels of oversight and tracking. And finally, what we're going to focus on today are partnerships, where you can establish formal relationships to identify the needs and the services that you're going to provide through that partnership, whether that's people coming into your organization or a more curated way for you to send your clients to another organization to get support. So for those of you who've seen the integration guide, this is going to be a bit of a review. For those of you for whom this is the first time you're seeing it, I'm just going to move through it quickly, but we'll make sure you have access to the link for this guide after the webinar. Hyacinth can make sure that gets out to you in our post-webinar mailing. So again, this is the Building Financial Capability Planning Guide for Integrated Services. This was done in partnership with the Administration for Children and Families. It's been in action, I think, for the past at least 5 years now, and for programs that have begun to incorporate financial capability or empowerment services, this has been a really useful strategic planning tool. So just a quick reminder, there are 4 sections in this planning guide with a number of tools and examples and worksheets. So we've meant for this to be very useful, practical material. The first section is looking at which financial capability services will have the greatest impact on the clients in your program. The second is who will deliver the identified financial capability services to your target clients. And this will be the meat of today's discussion, followed by, oops, we skipped something. I don't know what happened there. Sorry about that, y'all. There's a piece missing, I think, because my animation didn't come through. The third section is moving into action, where you're beginning to identify which approach you're going to use to deliver those services. So here you would see the referral plan, a partnership plan, and the do-it-yourself. And finally, the cross-cutting section is looking at where you might have key stakeholders and how you can ensure that you've got their support and can meet the needs of those stakeholders. So again, today's conversation will touch on identifying the services that you'll need, and then we'll focus on the plan. How will these services be integrated into your existing program? So another way to reinforce it, we're going to skip past what we talked about in Webinar 1, and you can access that recording on the Community Action Partnership website. Today we're going to focus primarily on deciding who will provide the services, the financial capability or empowerment services that your clients need at that point in time in your program that you've identified as the most relevant for these services. We're also going to talk about how to develop an internal implementation, referral, or partnership plan. Again, the emphasis today on partnerships to help connect clients to the services that will most meet their needs. And then part of that, of course, is identifying stakeholder support throughout, whether that is internal stakeholders, your clients, or the partners you're working with. So quickly, the referral process. This is where you might identify organizations who provide services that your clients need, and you're setting up a process to ensure that those clients can be referred out to become clients at that other organization for those services. So one advantage, obviously, from a program perspective is that it's less resource intensive. There's less training and staff development, and certainly won't require the same amount of financial investment for your organization. Instead, you're relying on the capability and the capacity of other organizations to meet the additional needs of your clients. Disadvantage here, of course, is that clients might have to engage in additional travel to go to another service site. That could limit their actual uptake of the service, regardless of how much they might actually need or want it. And also could mean that your partners might have different goals than you, because remember, you're sending them to become clients at that program, and they may or may not share the same vision for your clients about, as you have rather, about your clients' progress or measures of success. Finally, there's a chance that in a referral process, your client might not be a good fit for that other program. There's a lot of, when we think about this from a racial equity framework or structural analysis, there can also be often be some gatekeeping here or very high barriers to entry for programs who might have much higher expectations of what your client should be able to do, regardless of how accommodating you might be of their challenges. So successful referrals include screening. You want to make sure that your client is actually eligible and ready for the services available at the other organization. You want to make sure you prepare that client so they know what to expect. They might need to know how to get there, what sort of materials they'll need to bring, and sort of what the expectations will be of that program, even if they're different than what they need to do for your program. And this connecting piece, for some people, it's as simple as handing someone a phone number and an address. We don't think that that's the most useful way to help folks who are most often in need of these services in the first place. Even a referral process can be designed in such a way that you know who you're referring someone to. There's a warm handoff so that you can make sure there's a direct connection. The phone number works. You might even help that client have that initial intake conversation. And then to report, some support after the referral. So even though that client is receiving services at a new program, if they're having challenges, if you're concerned or they're concerned about their ability to sustain participation in both programs, someone on your team is helping that client navigate some of those challenges. So approach 2, what we're really focusing on today, is about strategic partnerships. This is where you're developing a more formalized way to share clients and share a vision for what this work actually is for that client with another organization. So this involves deeper relationships, and again, this idea of shared clients. So you're not sending someone away from you and to someone else. You're sending someone on a pathway through a service process that you've designed together with another organization. It could be co-located, where that organization and you share the same space. It could be that they come to visit your site to provide services specifically to your client, or some other way that you've navigated through some of those access barriers. It could be co-branded, and we can talk about that later on when we talk about VITA and how community organizations can be host sites for VITA programs, even if they're not providing that tax preparation services themselves. And the idea, again, is that we're reducing the impression and experience for the client that accessing those additional services is leaving your program and going somewhere else. This is about incorporating that partner's services as part of your own set of services. So advantages here include establishing a formal partnership and maximizing your individual strengths. You're bringing what you're good at, they're bringing what they're good at. This is all to benefit the clients that need both sides of your service option. Co-location can reduce the transportation barrier and expenses, especially if you're talking about folks with kids and multiple jobs, and we know that navigating bus lines and public transportation can be a real barrier. So partnerships can reduce that. Co-branding, again, helps to build a shared identity for you to make new relationships with clients that your other partner organization serves, and for your clients to recognize themselves as valid clients and valid community members for these other organizations. Disadvantages with partnerships could include compromise. If you don't start from the same vision, you have to work a little bit harder to make sure that you are on the same page about what this partnership purpose and outcome is supposed to be. You might have to give it some autonomy here, right? That maybe there's a certain time of day or a way that you like to do your work, and that might not always be available through your partnership. And also, this can take a little time, as you've even heard me describing it, to negotiate these dynamics. But we do think that the work is worth it. So again, successful partnerships have a shared set of outcomes for that partnership that benefit both organizations, and there's clarity on both sides. Staff members have the necessary qualifications, training, and resources to provide the services that they are committing to offer in this partnership, and resources for both partners are sufficient to maintain that partnership. It could be that you need someone to help coordinate this partnership, so that you might have a new staff position that's shared, but at no point should one partner feel like they are exhausting their available resources to maintain the partnership, and other better resource partners aren't sharing that challenge. And then do it yourself. This is, again, the capacity to deliver services in-house. So where you're identifying the need, you've identified the resources, you're training and qualifying your staff to be able to provide those services in addition to other services within your own program. So obviously here, one of the great things is control, that you can ensure that the goals and activities of this service integration contribute to a larger organizational vision, and that you can provide these services all in the same location with familiar staff and a familiar environment. A disadvantage, of course, is this is much more resource intensive. For folks already strapped for time or financial resources, DIY may not be the best strategy, and it certainly is not the only way to get this work done. So again, that's the three different approaches to integration. Our focus today is going to be on partnerships. So I don't know why I'm going backwards, sorry guys. So a reminder, as you're going through the integration guide, you'll see that, again, part one is talking about identifying the target program and target population so that you're not looking for a one-size-fits-all. If you're offering Head Start and a food pantry and job training and an after-school program, you might not see the needs being the same across the clients who access those services, and you shouldn't therefore expect to design a one-size-fits-all approach to addressing those needs. So find a program where clients are already engaged, you already have an active population, they have characteristics in common so they can relate to one another, and you can probably find a common approach that will meet most people's needs in that program, and that they represent a concrete set of resources and system elements that can be leveraged. So for example, if this service site already sees people after work and provides dinner while offering some sort of educational element, maybe this is a great place to start with some financial education and outreach. If it's a place that already offers transportation, then maybe you can tap into that to help people connect to another service site to get more of their needs met. The second thing you're going to do is identify the client's financial empowerment needs. And we've broken it down in the integration guide across different categories of financial capability needs. whether that's money management, income supports, including free volunteer income tax preparation, or state and local benefits, where they need access to credit or debt management, financial services, saving strategies, or consumer protections. A lot of folks who are marginalized do, in fact, have access to loans, but at very exploitative rates and from, a very disempowered position. So sometimes what folks need first is someone to help advocate on their behalf and help them learn to advocate. So we've listed types of services or types of needs that your clients might have. Then you're going to identify the types of services to provide to meet those needs. And so this is not an exhaustive list, but again, it could be financial coaching or counseling, it could be a matched savings account, it could be home ownership education, a number of different things that you've identified and tested, and the integration guide gives you some tips on how to do this very well. So now let's take a closer look at the partnership tools in the integration guide. How do you identify potential partners and assess their relevance to your work? So you'll see that in Section 2 of the integration guide, there's a number of tools to help you build the team, and this includes both your internal capacity assessment and an inventory of available community service providers. This is sort of a resource mapping. Who's out there, what do they offer, and how relevant are those services to the needs of our clients? So in Tool 6, you'll do some assessment, and then in Tool 7, you can help identify who will deliver the services that your clients need. So I want to show you a couple of screenshots. You can see what these tools are, and you can imagine how you can pick up any one of these worksheets and work through them at your own leisure. Keep in mind, the integration guide is not a to Z process. You do not have to start at the beginning and end at the end. You can pick up where it's relevant for you. Just keep in mind that we will refer people to key decision points to help you build the next section. So again, here, as you're identifying potential providers, it's important to already know who your clients are and what their needs are, so you're identifying the right folks to meet those needs. So here, it's just a worksheet, right? You want people to know who's out there, what kind of services they provide, and any additional notes you can make about your current or previous relationships with these providers, including, again, an equity frame. How do these service providers relate to your clients? What are your clients' perspectives of these service providers? It doesn't matter that they're simply out in the environment if they are not going to be relevant to or kind to or appropriate for your particular client. Then I'm going to skip this because I want to leave room for us to have a discussion at the end, but this is a question, again, for organizations to consider at all levels, whether it's your frontline staff, your program folks, or your senior management that goes out and starts brokering relationships. How do you find organizations that provide financial capability services in your community? What are those pathways? And I'd actually be kind of curious if you wanted to start chatting some of these to me in the chat box. When we get another break, before we turn to Kiba, we can take a look at this because my colleague Kiba does a lot of work with community practitioners, and this is a common question that they ask when they're doing technical assistance. So I'd be curious to know, from where you sit in your organization, how do you find organizations that provide financial capability or financial empowerment services in your community? In Tool 6, this gives you a set of questions or perspectives to use to assess those community service providers. So the first step on Tool 5 was identifying who's out there. Now we want to know more about them. In particular, what's really important to consider here is the client fit, the client access, and organizational capacity. So client fit. Are your clients eligible for the services at this program? And are those services tailored to meet the needs of your specific clients? Second, client access. Does the location, the time, or the cost of these services work for your clients? Again, we're trying to be more strategic here. A one size won't fit all, particularly for folks who've been marginalized and may have additional needs. We want you to use what you know about your clients and about your community to make sure that these potential partners meet their needs. And finally, organizational capacity. Does the other organization have the staff power and the time to serve additional clients? If they, like you, are particularly stretched thin because they're very specialized and targeted but under-resourced, it's important to know that. You can address these issues more effectively if you have some in-depth knowledge, again, of your client's needs and about the climate in which they are living their lives. So we would encourage you, again, to take a look at Tool 1 in the integration guide, which helps you identify your client's actual priorities and needs before you go too far down this partnership pathway. So again, this is what the checklist looks like. It allows you to have a simple point of reference, and people use this in a couple different ways. You might have a team meeting where you sit around and from what you already know about the organizations, try to gather this information. Then you might have a more formalized inquiry where you can do a little bit more research or have conversations with these organizations to learn more. But it's good to test assumptions with more information, and it depends on what kind of time you have to explore this. What we really want to point out here is that there may be remaining questions. You may know something about your particular community or the environment in which your clients are navigating through these systems, and that might mean picking up the phone to ask some more targeted questions of these service providers. And again, Tool 7. Now on your screen, you can see what it looks like in the integration guide. And this is how you will put together Tools 5 and 6. It helps you set up a table where you can summarize for each provider or each service that you're interested in the key considerations regarding organizational capacity, client access, and client fit. So you'll capture some of your decision points here, and it's a one-stop way to have a quick point of reference, right? So we've helped you gather the information. Now you can do some decision-making once you've been able to summarize the key issues, whether you want to continue as a potential referral partner, a more integrated partner, or maybe you don't want to work with them, you want to try to do some of this stuff on your own. And again, the notes section is really important, and you'll see an example in the integration guide. There's a sample community action agency called HOPE, and you'll see how HOPE is navigating some of these questions as they're identifying potential partnerships. So in the integration guide, you'll see what these forms look like filled out, so you have something to use as an example as you do the work. Now we're going to take a closer look at Section 3 in the guide. And here we're talking about getting more clear about the specific plan you're going to use to adjust your workflow. It means you do need to sort of map what's currently going on in your program workflow. Then you're going to take a closer look at the plan you're going to design. And again, our focus here is primarily around the partnership plan. And this is about, again, engagement between organizations, between two organizations going a bit deeper. Referrals are useful, but integrated partnerships are much meatier, where referrals involve helping clients make connections between two current programs. Partnerships could include altering your current programs to better meet client needs. It may mean something about co-location, or setting up special days to meet a specific client need that you both agreed to. And this tool, the partnership plan tool, has 3 parts. The first lists basic information about each organization. You'll detail information about yourself. You'll detail information about your potential partner organization. The second will capture key information about the partnership itself so that you can identify the interests and priorities of each organization and what you're trying to build together, including how success is defined and how you'll develop shared measurement of the work. You also talk a little bit more about how you're going to work together to manage these operations. And finally, in the partnership plan, you'll put together what the program workflow will look like, what will have to change in your existing program and in your partner's program to build out this new partnership strategy. So here again is what HOPE, the fictional HOPE Community Action Agency, what their plan looked like. And so I'm not going to go into the weeds with you here. I know that you can read this on your own when you're ready, but just an example of the kind of thought that goes into this, from sharing your individual missions, your intentional collective goals, types of services that you're actually partnering to provide. It may not mean that you integrate everything. It may mean that there's just one or two key places where you're going to partner. Here, you're breaking out a little bit further into the activities that the partnership's going to undertake, and you're going to need to list which activities you're committing to, which activities the partner's committing to, and what, if anything, is new in your service design. The timing, the location, the expense may change. How you're going to data share and evaluate success is really important. And it could be that one partner already has a great set of data collection tools, and you simply adapt those to meet the needs of this new program, or you might work together to forge something new, depending on how new this partnership looks to you both. Finally, you're going to talk about resources. What are you bringing to the table? What additional, perhaps, shared fundraising you might engage in, or cross-training you might engage in, so that you have the resources you need on both sides of the partnership. And then the best strategy is to make sure you know before you get started what your sustainability plan will look like. If staff turns over, if something changes in your current funding structure, how do you plan to sustain this partnership so that your clients can rely on its consistent presence and its ability to meet the needs of your community? So I'm going to pause here. And again, this is a chat box question. If you could let me know from where you guys currently sit in your work, what sort of financial empowerment integration approaches are you currently using at your organization? And I've laid it out here in what I've often heard, but you might have a different response. Are you primarily DIY or in-house? Do you primarily offer financial capability services inside your own program with your own staff? Do you primarily identify external partners and structure referrals to outside partners? Are you primarily partnering with other service providers in this much more structured way that I talked about? Maybe it's a combination of the above, or maybe I missed it completely. Maybe you do something very different. We would love to see that. So I'm going to practice my navigation skills through this WebEx technology and see if I can pick up any chat or response. Great. So I see that at least one or two folks are saying primarily you're using partnerships, which is really exciting, and I would love to know a little bit more about that. It sounds like one of you has a financial opportunity center where you might have a one-stop shop where you're doing some more integrated financial capability work. So please keep sharing your thoughts, all right? I see a couple of combinations and partnerships. What's interesting is that I haven't seen anyone say primarily DIY. So far, no one has said, we do most of this stuff ourselves, which is probably a good thing. When we have heard that, and we'll talk to Kiba in a moment about some of what she's learned from the field. Often we find organizations that are trying to do it all in-house find themselves very strapped for resources, from staff buy-in, and that key stakeholder support we talked about is sometimes missing because people feel a little overburdened trying to do it all themselves. Excellent. And it looks like partnership opportunities might be on the horizon with your local economic empowerment center, which is excellent. When Hyacinth and I were talking about this particular topic, we talked about how important it might be for some community action agencies to identify municipal partners, folks on your local level who might be doing things through your city government or maybe through an anchor institution like a university, so that you're tapping into existing strong resources and networks and bringing your specialized insight about your client population and the communities that you serve to enrich the availability and relevance of the services through your city or through those anchor institutions for the folks who might need it most. I got a great comment here. One of the challenges that you all have identified is bringing services to your community members rather than asking them to go external. And that's huge, and I'm really glad to see you all are thinking about that, because certainly that is one of the biggest challenges about external referrals, is getting there. and making sure that when folks do get there, that they have the right reception. Again, the idea that you all focus on a trauma-informed strategy and one that might be looking at intergenerational trauma, not just individual level or community level trauma, is that we have people in our service, Malu, who have been through so many systems, who are being tracked and having to report and having to account over and over again to multiple external agencies, all sorts of details about their lives. And to send someone out to yet another service provider to go through another set of intake in another part of town through however many buses or negotiated car rides, that's a lot of work. And I'm glad to hear you all name that. Okay, and I do see one DIY, and this DIY still has a referral element. So you recognize that there's some things y'all can do internally, but maybe you need to send folks to some better resource or more specialized services if you're not able to do that yourself. This is excellent. Thank you all for giving us some insights about where you stand currently. And now I'm going to open our conversation to my colleague, Kiba, who's been sitting and nodding and taking notes as we started off our conversation. So again, Kiba Varun is Senior Program Manager on our Savings and Financial Capability team here at Prosperity Now. If you've seen some of our earlier publications, it's her team that did a lot to design this integration guide. Kiba herself has been hard at work developing a brand new tool we're very excited about, our financial coaching design guide with a specific emphasis on racial equity and trauma-informed and community-centered care. So, Kiba, glad to have you in today's conversation.
Thank you for having me.
Excellent. So for folks who might not know a lot about your work, tell us a bit more about you and how you came to this work. And I want to make sure you feel like you can talk to these issues as a whole person and not just a face on the screen.
Yeah, so I moved from Pakistan with my family when I was 6 years old, and saw my parents grapple with the realities of being working class and immigrant working class and what that meant in a relatively conservative area of Texas, and grew up really understanding not just what financial challenges can be, but what are the ramifications on people, families, their sense of self, their sense of the roles that they play in each other's lives, and saw how my parents' identities as mother and father really changed over time depending on what was happening financially with them. And I, after graduating from college, I started working at, I always wanted to work abroad, and then the realities of after you graduate hit me, and I was sort of looking for jobs in Houston where I was raised, and started working at the Alliance for Multicultural Community Services, which is a refugee and immigrant services organization, and we do everything from resettlement to we welcome newcomers at the airports to getting their kids resettled in schools, all the way to purchasing homes and buying cars, and that was the first time where I grappled with the same experiences that my parents and I had been having, but now I was sort of responsible for this on a day-to-day basis, and really came to understand a host of things, but everything from how immigrants become raised in this society to the complexities of financial challenges depending on where you are sitting on race, gender, class, disability, and all those kind of things. And was looking for a newer a challenge, and then there were things going on in life, and this position came open in Prosperity Now, and so now the work I do is sort of one step removed. So many of you may know that Prosperity Now is not working directly with clients, but we're an intermediary. So a lot of the work that my team and I do is with organizations like the Alliance, where I was at, where we work with staff to assess what are their community's needs financially, but it's interesting that a lot of other non-financial stuff comes up in talking about what financial needs are, and then supporting them and thinking about what are the resources they have to meet those needs in-house or through partnerships or through referrals, and how do all of those pieces coexist in a way that makes the experience for the user, the participant, the program participant, the client, really seamless. So in addition to thinking about what are the services that make the most sense and who's going to provide them, what is the experience going to be like actually participating in those services? And given that both from my lived experience with my parents and sort of seeing them go from appointment to appointment, and the work that we were doing at the Alliance, where all services were literally in a 5-story building, so people could just walk from floor to floor to get, I really take that last piece about what the user experience is like to heart, and spend, I think, more time probably than people expect or want to, or that I should, but just because it's so important to think about and reflect on as much as possible what the experience is going to be like. Because if it's not efficient and if it's not enjoyable, people are not going to stay engaged and retain.
Excellent. Yeah, I really appreciate that. And it sounds like, in addition to understanding the complexities of a person's experience or a family's experience from wherever they might land on race and gender and class, also immigration status. And we've been seeing a lot of that, right? That whether or not someone is fully accredited as an immigrant or still in the multi-year process of becoming a citizen or anywhere along that pathway adds an additional layer to the work. And it sometimes what we're seeing is these elements of consideration are missing as people are designing their programs. So one of the questions that has often come up is how do programs identify some of the access barriers? How do programs develop the right questions to ask as they're beginning to assess possible partnerships? And maybe we can pull back and have you tell us a little bit about what technical assistance looks like, where you might encounter an organization, so we can dive in a little bit deeper to some of the questions you might help an organization explore.
Sure. So when organizations apply to receive technical assistance from us, it's an opt-in process. So that's just important to keep in mind that they've done some, they're not being mandated to work with us, right? So there's not necessarily any funding looming over their head. They voluntarily decided to participate in this process, and are either hearing from clients directly or from staff, feel like financial challenges are coming up in conversations, and more importantly, the work that they're doing that's not related to financial capability is being impacted because of those unaddressed needs. So that's typically, like, regardless of whether it's a Catholic charity that I've worked with, or a rural organization, or United Ways, or a youth workforce, there is like a general sentiment, predominantly with the leadership, which in the beginning stages, that's who we are speaking with, that we need to do something about the financial challenges that our communities are experiencing. Not necessarily all of them have, particularly those that are submitting the applications to work with us, have tangible examples of what the challenges are. Oftentimes the challenges are manifesting themselves in people not staying engaged in the program. So people are dropping out, they're not showing up on time, and so it's hurting other outcomes of that program. And how they start, so the first step we'll do is in the first series of calls, so technical assistance comprises of several different things. There'll be monthly or biweekly calls with technical assistance providers, site visits, peer learning calls, all aimed to get at the questions that you had on the screen earlier about the planning guide. The first step that we will take, the first month or so, is really thinking about and getting at what do the staff know about the lives of their participants, right? Not just financial challenges, right? Not what are the things that you need to quote unquote fix, but what's going on? What does their day-to-day look like? And we often find that those who have who are our point of contact, which are oftentimes like the program managers or director level, just given where they sit at the organization, and depending on what their lived experience may have, grapple with giving us concrete examples, which is a really good way of bringing in other staff into the process. So then the integration process becomes more than just the technical assistance provider and the manager or the director. Now there's a planning team that's involved, right? Because without having a full understanding of what it is that your clients are experiencing and what their lives are, the step of identifying services is very far away, right? And we'll find that depending on the community, staff are part of the communities, right? Their lived experiences and their challenges are not so far removed from their participants, in which case it makes also an interesting conversation for what are the support that you need to provide staff. But usually the frontline staff or those that are just doing direct work with the participants can give really good insight into what's happening. With enough probing, though, I think there's also, you'll see staff testing each other's assumptions or calling out what are things that they don't know, that they perceive but they're not sure. And that's where we'll support the organizations in creating surveys or focus groups, really being mindful, though, that even the approach that you take can be exclusionary or inclusive. And so if, you know, a lot of your service delivery is verbal, right, then one-on-one feedback is probably the way to go. If you rarely see participants and they're used to receiving things via email and mail from you, then that's probably the way to go. So the strategy is not like a one-size-fits-all. I think we work with the organizations that are part of our technical assistance to really think about what are even the communication styles that your participants are going to be receptive to, and then crafting your strategy for how to collect this input with that in mind.
Wow, so it definitely is not something that a person or an organization lands on lightly. It sounds like it requires a lot of self-assessment and some support to begin to peel away, the way you said it, what we perceive but may not actually know, versus designing based on what we think we already know from having been at this for a while. So when we look at this idea of partnerships, when we look at identifying who's out there in the larger community providing services and assessing whether they're a fit for our clients. What are some ways that you've seen organizations tackle that? There are some obvious assumptions, perhaps, that financial institutions will be easy to access for everyone, or that large-scale providers are universally accessible to everyone. May not always be the case. So how do organizations assess the right fit culturally or in the framework that they have for who they're serving, or the depth of knowledge they even want to have about the clients?
So I think, you know, which is why I think the way that the planning guide is laid out is really, really helpful, is first, I think, identifying what it is, why it is that you want to form the partnership that you want, right? So is it that you are just, you just have not enough capacity to provide the services that you've now identified are the needs for your community, right? But I think of, particularly in financial capability, there's sort of like three sort of buckets of partnerships, right? One is with financial capability service providers. So you've identified financial coaching or VITA, for example, is a service that would be beneficial to your community. You've also identified that you don't have the resources to do it in-house, and therefore you need to find a partner. There's another bucket of non-financial capability services that you need to provide in conjunction with FinCap services to make sure that the FinCap work that you're doing, you get the most bang for your buck, right? So in this case would be housing organizations, food pantries, community colleges, employers, all the other touch points that an individual has with other sort of systems in your community that are not doing FinCap work, but that service needs to be provided in conjunction with financial capability, right? Mental health needs, right? Like all of those. And the third bucket is the access to services. So in this case, or access to products, in which case like financial institutions can fit into that bucket. So depending on what you want to do a service for, right? Like it's not just about finding a partner that can do that service, but also assessing how they do what they do, right? So thinking about is the language in which they're going to provide services something that your clients will be, that will meet your clients where they are? What about their approach to, we were talking about a different citizenship status, right, undocumented status. So what will the approach of that partner be to your participants as individual, like human beings, right? And a lot of my partners have taken some really unique ways of assessing that. They have recruited staff from their organization to do observing sessions and see how services are provided, sitting in a reception area and just kind of getting a sense of how people are treated when they're first walk in. With enough due diligence, you can also get a pilot group of clients who are very aware that this is a new partnership that you want to test out, that are willing to sort of engage in that to give you feedback on is another great way. And also just having really honest conversations with the partner that you're pursuing a partnership with about not just what are your needs, what are you bringing to the table, but here's how we approach service delivery, right? And seeing, like, is there alignment on that, right? So if people are being treated as very transactional, right, and in one place, and not with you, like, they're not going to come back to that partner, right? And in which case, if you've already made agreements about meeting a certain quota and all those kind of things, if people are not going to go back to that partner, you're not only hurting your relationship with your client, but you're also hurting your relationship with that partner, right? So the more, like, upfront work you can do on, do they have the capacity? If they have limited capacity, how many people can they realistically serve? What is the wait time? What are things that the client will have to provide there that you're not asking them for, right? Documents and things like that. And just making sure that the approach and the treatment of the person is similar.
Yeah, I think for this particular audience, that's really powerful, Kiba. Having been on a number of these webinars with the Hyacinth, every time the Community Action Partnership starts one of these conversations, they recite the mission and the value of this organization, of this service network. And I think that's really important. And maybe even I'm guilty of this conversation being framed as, how do organizations find other partners to amplify or support their work? But maybe we can turn this around and think about, how can organizations recognize their strength and value as a potential partner for other organizations, particularly if they're coming with some of the things you just talked about. If an organization already has a cultural center whereby each individual participant is shown fundamental human respect, that there's been a simplification of the onboarding process, and maybe clients are retained regardless of how engaged they are across the service year. How can an organization, a community action agency, start identifying the strengths they can bring so they can maybe market themselves as a resource for other partnerships that are beginning to form, whether that's at a community, whether it's at a citywide economic empowerment center or a new initiative being launched by an outside agency. Any suggestions on how we can start recognizing those cultural values and approaches as strengths to bring to a partnership?
That's a good question. I wouldn't say that that is a question that, in all honesty, we even get to in our technical assisted approach, but I think it's an important one. One of the tools in the guide, I believe it's the Tool 8, which is on the current program flow, the journey mapping, really having an understanding of what, and sort of a concrete example of the participant's journey in your program, and then overlaying that with what are the successes at each point, right, is a good way of demonstrating someone that's not familiar with all that you do, what it is that you do, right? The second piece, I think, would be, I know that we oftentimes, we're all collecting like a lot of data, right? But the outcomes that you are tracking, you're achieving with the work that you're already doing, what internally are you doing to achieve those outcomes, right? So it's not that participants are getting jobs or increasing the credit score and all of that, which is important, but what are the strengths of your organization that are leading to those outcomes, which is something that organizations just don't have time to do that kind of analysis, right? But there are things, whether it's supporting with pulling credit reports or one-on-one engagement, right, or family counseling, right, in-person visits, like home visits, right? There are a lot of strengths in just the way that you deliver services that are helping your participants meet those outcomes. So I would say those are probably strategies to begin articulating what those strengths are. And also being clear of what your limitations are, right? So like once you've outlined the journey that your participant takes, being really honest with yourself, and this is where like staff from all levels can be so helpful, is really articulating what are the limitations? What if we had more resources, whether that's a partnership or funding or whatever, if we had more, what more could we do, right? So even posing limitations as opportunities, which I think for new partners, whether they're financial institutions or a community service partner or a funder, knowing that you have a vision for addressing that limitation, right, and how that's going to enhance the outcomes of your participants can be a good way to have that conversation.
That's really exciting, and thank you for that, Kiba. And before we transition to Rebecca, who's now able to join us, I just want to reflect for those of you who might be in this position where you've developed something that you know is working with your clients and supporting the needs of your community sort of comprehensively. The power of the client story really can't be underestimated, right? Overestimated. There's so much that you can hear your clients say in a way that only they could say it that has some value as well. And maybe one of the lowest resource ways to hear more about what your program is doing that you can then translate as value for potential partners is to get some of that client feedback. That's one of the easiest ways. And if you have debriefing sessions or team meetings, even if it's just that you go over your case notes, what can you point to as a support that you have offered that allowed someone to navigate barriers, particularly if you can see that across your community? How have you reduced structural barriers to allow potential, individual potential to shine? What kind of support have you offered in your referrals so that you help them stay connected to you even as they're exploring options elsewhere? So, Kiba, I'm going to turn our conversation over to Rebecca, and then we're going to come back to a discussion with all of us and the audience. So we've been joined now by my colleague, Rebecca Thompson. Again, she's the project director of the Taxpayer Opportunity Network, which is, again, a community of community tax providers, advocates, and even researchers. It's a very large nationwide network of people who've made it their mission to support community financial empowerment through very accurate, no-cost tax preparation and ancillary supports, not just during the tax season, but year-round. So, Rebecca, thank you for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you, Carmen. It's great to be here.
All right. So, Rebecca, just like I gave Kiba a chance to tell us a little bit about how she came to Prosperity Now, just a light touch, if you could tell us a little bit about how you came to community tax preparation and what brought you to the Taxpayer Opportunity Network.
Right. Thank you, Carmen. It's great to be here, and thank you for this opportunity to speak to this group. I actually probably landed in the world of community tax preparation just by happenstance, or so I would have thought. It would have been by coincidence and happenstance that I needed a job and wound up at a nonprofit organization, and it just happened that they had an opening, and my educational background matched with the skill set and the arena for which the position was opening. There was a position open, and that was actually something that had always been my passion, was to help people to become financially stable, which is why I pursued a degree in economics, is my background, and so it was always something that I sought to do. Didn't imagine that I'd be doing it at this level, but I started operating as a VITA program operator, manager, in a small program, serving 1,200 people the first year, 1,500 people my second year, in a small town in Florida, and kind of moved up the ranks to a larger program in a larger organization. And in 2014, 2014, 2015, actually, the Taxpayer Opportunity Network was really being formulated. They started in late 2014. In 2015, one of the things that Prosperity Now, which was then CFED, looked to do was to develop a steering committee. And just having a few years of experience and knowledge, my boss actually encouraged me to nominate myself for the steering committee. And so I did. I joined the inaugural steering committee, and really my eyes were opened to the whole world of community tax preparation and the field that was much larger than the towns that I had served, even serving a large metropolitan area in Jacksonville, Florida, even understanding and gaining knowledge and insight and connections to people from across the country who were experiencing the same challenges that I was, doing the same work, but who also had other creative ideas about how to overcome challenges. I had some that I could share as well. And from that experience as a part of the inaugural steering committee, I actually found my way here into the role as the project director of the Taxpayer Opportunity Network.
You know, Rebecca, as personable as you are and how easy it is to work with you and all the great energy you have, I did not know you had a background in economics. So that is not meant to be slanderous to anyone else who has an economics degree, but it's really excellent to hear that there's so many people who recognize the connection between financial conditions, not just personal individual finance, but some of the larger issues. And we're going to talk to Rebecca briefly about some of her policy work, but folks who recognize that there are some structural issues to address are often drawn to organizations like community action agencies where that work can happen on a community level and an individual level, but you can see that work happening across the country, and it feels great to not be isolated. So, in the work of the Taxpayer Opportunity Network, or TON, there's been a lot of partnerships at the national level between, for example, Prosperity Now and Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, the IRS, to start looking at not just tax preparation and the savings of not paying a tax preparer or getting your taxes prepared correctly the first time so you don't have to worry about going back and redoing your taxes. There's been an exploration of integrating savings during the tax moment. For a lot of communities, getting your taxes prepared for a lot of households is the largest, check of the year. It's the largest paycheck of the year for folks who are getting some of the refund back. And recognizing that as an opportunity to encourage people to start looking at their larger financial picture, not just in February, but across the year. There's been some major work done around savings. And a lot of that's happened through what we were talking about earlier, whether it's a do-it-yourself effort in the VITA program to try to train volunteers to learn how to talk about savings. Maybe it's been referrals to recognize where you can refer a tax client to an outside financial capability provider. Or what we're talking about today is partnerships where you're bringing in service providers of different types into the tax site or opening new tax sites in a community that hasn't had free tax prep. So before I turn to some of what we learned from the CFPB, Rebecca, tell us what is so powerful about the financial capability, the financial empowerment moment in the tax preparation timeframe?
Well, you know, like you mentioned, Carmen, it is, for many of the families that we serve, the largest financial transaction that they have in a year. And one of the things that we've discovered over the last several years, years of research with our partners like CFPB and Washington University in St. Louis, is that really folks are making up their mind. While they're coming to us at that moment, they've actually already decided what they're going to do and what that financial transaction means for their life and for their family's financial future or their current economic stability. They've already made up their mind a few months before. And typically it's 6 months before they've already made up their mind. So if you imagine a low-income household, someone that's coming to get their taxes done in February, mid-February, providing that their household situation hasn't changed much since the previous year, they've already known since October. They've been anticipating getting this refund. They've been planning for their tax refund. And so they have an idea, and they are managing their money. And I think one caveat for people in our field is that we tend to think that low-income people don't manage their money, but they are managing, and they are negotiating. They're negotiating Thanksgiving, and they're negotiating Christmas and utility bills and the first of the year. And so when they come to us in February, they've had all that in mind for the last 6 months. And so a lot of times the refund is already spent. So this is one of the challenges that we've had at the tax time moment in encouraging savings, is that the refund is already spent. So fortunately, in our current state, and given that this is what we've experienced over the last several years, now we know that we actually need to talk to folks a lot earlier than the tax time moment. The tax time moment is not the right moment to have those conversations. And I think that's where a lot of our partners, our community partners, who touch the clients that come to us year-round, have really a great opportunity to have a great influence on our taxpayers and the people who come to the VITA sites and our community tax prep sites during the season. For organizations, nonprofit partners who are talking with them in September and October and November and August and all those months that are outside of the season, there is a tremendous opportunity to encourage them and plant seeds around saving. So as those families and households are making up their minds about how they're going to spend their refunds, we really need to rely on our community partners to plant the seeds of saving into the picture of how that family is planning out their refunds already.
So this almost taps into the conversation we were having with Kiba about how does an organization like a community action agency recognize the strengths of what they offer as potential partners? And so for a VITA site who's hoping to encourage a taxpayer to set aside some piece of their refund for a rainy day, they're really building on conversations that nonprofit partners and community organizations have been having with these same folks from a different perspective year-round. So it could be that you are a Head Start program and you know that you've been able to talk about the savings or the opportunities that child care has provided for the family. You're hearing from that parent that stretch, that tension that happens in the fall when money is running a little thin, and you start hearing that anticipation, that refund anticipation conversation. I'm going to be a little late with some bills, but no worries. I'm going to get it all back in February and pay back what I owe. And so your point then, by the time they get to the VITA site, the strategy is already in place, and it's often, rather than an empowerment moment for folks, it's a recovery moment. And if there's any money left over for savings, it's been washed away by the urgency to take care of the debt and struggle that folks are seeing earlier in the year. Go ahead.
I was going to say, one of the things also that we have learned or identified in the last couple of years is that while savings is a primary means for what we in our industry think of as a way to achieve financial capability, that also people are paying down debt. They're paying off medical bills, like credit card debt. They're buying cars. I had a single mother this year who brought her 1-year-old daughter to me. She was pregnant the last time I prepared her return, and so she brought her daughter to me this year. And she said, I did what you told me to do, and here's all my information. My encouragement to her had been that she needed to work, however much that she could, so that she could get the earned income credit, because if she didn't work, you know, she was going to cut herself out of a significant refund. She worked, she got the earned income credit, she got the child tax credit, and everything, and she says, and I'm going to use my refund to buy us a car. So it's a little bit easier for me to get back and forth to work because her mom had been transporting her. So all of those things that families use to improve their financial situation in addition to saving, we consider all of those financial capability services. it's all good. It's all going towards improving their family financial well-being.
Right. And I think the language that I love that Community Action Partnership uses around financial empowerment is centering the breadth of needs. There's just so many diverse needs that communities can have around their finances. Savings, assets, preventing crisis in a future time is important, and we're often encountering people who have already been through those crisis times, may currently be in those crisis times, and we need partners, community organizations who understand that, have strong relationships with these participants so that there's an integrated pathway to get additional support that doesn't judge or exclude them from coming from this more compromised financial position. Yeah. So we were looking for one of your community action partners who has built strong partnership relationships with VITA to give us this example. But just quickly, can you tell us what it might look like for a community action agency? We talked about this partnership strategy where you want shared values, shared mission, shared objectives, but maybe your resources are different. How might a community action agency be a partner to a VITA program, even if they themselves don't have the capacity to provide the community tax preparation services themselves?
Thank you. That's a great question, and I think it's worth mentioning that there are a lot of options. You know, there is no cookie-cutter partnership, but there are a few key elements I think that are really important. The first one is a commitment, and I think it's a shared commitment to financial empowerment, family financial well-being. However we want to phrase it, there is that shared commitment, which in my time as a program manager and even here in this role, I certainly recognize that we have that shared commitment among the community tax prep field and community action partnership. So that commitment to the vision, I guess, is the main thing. The other thing is also recognition, and it is recognizing that free tax preparation does serve a purpose in fulfilling our vision. That it actually is a financial capability service. You know, oftentimes we talk about savings, tax time savings, as that being the financial capability service. But like I mentioned before, when people are using their refund and they're paying down debt and they're buying cars, you know, and they're catching up on bills and they're saving, all of that is building their financial capability and working towards their family financial well-being. So it's got to be a recognition that this free tax prep service actually does all of those things. And it does a little bit more because families do save. They get back all of their refund. Yeah. Those two things being kind of foundational, I would say, and I was glad I came in on your comment earlier, Kiba, about recognizing organizational capacity, because that's probably like the third element is you have to recognize what you can do. I've had the benefit of having community action partners who operated a VITA site. Their employees were you know, the volunteer tax preparers. It was fully integrated into their organization and into their location. Okay, they did that at one location. There was another more rural community location that couldn't do that. And I think it was important for me as a partner to that community action agency to make sure I recognized where their organizational capacity limits were, and we worked together to come up with a solution. So I would say the fourth thing is also creativity. You have to be creative. This is not one size fits all. This is not one big box. We have to be able to think outside of the box, and in my role, I have the opportunity to help programs to think outside of the box for how we can creatively deliver services, free tax prep services. If you look around the big box stores, they're doing it 6 ways from Sunday. You can get your taxes done. You can come in and you can sit down, you can drop off your stuff, you can do it online. There are so many different ways that people can get their taxes done, and so we have to think outside the box and work towards coming up with creative solutions to do that as well.
Excellent. That's really helpful, and that creativity is going to help drive any of the decisions these organizations make about who to partner with, how to partner, And there's ways to do this work, even if it is to support someone with the capacity you have as they explore something new. So I want to thank you both, Kiba and Rebecca, for being on this webinar today. I want to turn to our participants on today's call. If you had any questions for Kiba or Rebecca about partnerships, about the integration guide from Kiba's perspective, about VITA, or how to inspire or support financial empowerment for folks as they think about that tax refund. And so, Hyacinth, I don't want to take up too much more of our time, so I'm going to turn to you to help us with the remaining parts of that Q&A and close out. Okay, I'm not sure if you might be muted, Hyacinth, so we are open to audience Q&A, and I know there's some things that I can see on my end, but I know that Hyacinth has a greater line of sight than I do on these.
Thank you, Carmen, and you're right. I was muted and was talking away for like 2 minutes, so thank you for that. Can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Okay, great. And it looks like I just got a question in, so perfect timing. Let me see if I can open it up. Oh, just a comment to our presenters saying thank you for all of this great information. It gave them some insight on some things to take back to their agency, so great job.
That is always great to hear.
I like to share those, too. I don't see any questions at the moment, and I do want to be mindful of folks' time. I think at the end, Carmen, you have your contact information, or they have mine, so if any other questions pop up, we can certainly direct folks to our wonderful presenters today and to yourself. But I think we're going to go ahead and see if there aren't any questions bubbling up.
Okay, yeah. Let me skip ahead so I can have it on screen as you share out. There you go. Thank you.
Let me know when I get to it. I know, do you want to do a quick plug of your conference?
Yeah, we know that you're having an excellent convening just next month in Denver, and we'll be there as well. And right after that, we're having our Prosperity Summit in the National Harbor area right outside of Washington, D.C., September 5th through 7th. And we'll be talking about all kinds of financial empowerment topics there, from a VitaCon mini-conference to racial wealth equity work. So if you can't join us live, we'll probably be sharing some of that information out afterwards, so stay tuned, and we'd love to have you.
Yeah, we're looking forward to it. We're going to be there, too, so we're very excited. It's going to be a long 2 weeks, but we're excited to join you all right across the river. So here's the contact information, right? Oh, we just got a question in. I think we can do this one. I think it's for all of our presenters. What kind of VITA partners can you suggest for our situation? We work a lot with consumer credit bureaus, banks, and AARP. Are there any others that you would offer for us to consider?
I think we would probably want to clarify if this is someone who provides VITA services and they're looking for community partners as a VITA site looking to expand their reach, or is this an organization that's looking to be a community organization that's linking their community to VITA services?
So, Marlene, I know you sent that question in. Okay, I think she said both internal services and partner sites.
So Rebecca might have a line of sight, and then I might have an opinion as well as a former VITA manager. Want me to start while you think that through? So if you're thinking about your own internal services ancillary to VITA, things that are not tax preparation related, it'd be really great for you to look for who provides community tax preparation in your community. Make sure they know who you are and all of the things that you offer. When we were talking earlier about recognizing your strengths as a community organization, that it absolutely includes the wraparound support you offer to someone who's only going to be seen for 1, maybe 2 visits at a VITA site, but has additional needs. So you can offer yourself up as a referral partner. You can offer yourself up as someone who can come on site, maybe to do some education or have materials on site or help train volunteer staff. If you're the VITA service provider, one thing you could do is make sure folks know that your site is there in this community where you might have unique interests for maybe elder clients or folks with a certain in a certain zip code. Make sure you're reaching out so people know that your site's there and how quickly your appointments book, so that if you can offer special pathways so people can refer their participants to register for services at your site, these are some really great ways to partner depending on capacity in your own community.
And I would just add to that, we found great partnerships in our colleges and community colleges and even high school students. And so those are just a few more options. And of course, you know, if you're a VITA provider or you're a community provider, a community action agency that doesn't provide VITA, I would make it a point to connect to as many of the nonprofit organizations in your community, particularly those who deal with income and financial stability services.
Mm-hmm. And just to clarify, when Rebecca mentioned colleges, high schools, she's speaking as sources for potential volunteers to do the tax preparation or all the different roles that a VITA site needs from their volunteers.
Excellent. Thank you so much for that comment. I think we are going to have to cut the questions for now, but you can see the contact information for our wonderful presenters here on the screen. I want to give a special thanks to Kiba and Rebecca for joining us for today's conversation, and of course, Carmen, as always, for leading us in these discussions that we have in this webinar series. So thank you all again for your time and sharing your expertise and experience with us today.
Our pleasure.
All right, so thank you, ladies. So we're going to have to move past the questions, but you can reach out. But just a couple of things that we want to remind you about from our end on the partnership. Of course, you joined us today for our installment of Webinar Wednesdays, but we have our schedule jam-packed now through the end of September. So here are our next upcoming webinars that you'll see. The next one is next week, Planning for Service Integration Using a Multidisciplinary Team Approach. A couple weeks later, on August 15th, we have the fourth and final piece of our Collective Impact series. And then later, a month later, in September, we're going to hear again from Prosperity Now, and they're going to talk to us more about building wealth across generations, so strategies, programs, services, things that you can be thinking about in your organization, and how you can work with different populations in your community to think about building wealth and what that might look like for different people. So we're really excited for that. Once we share out the slides after today's event, you'll be able to register here, but you can also find them on the partnership's website to go ahead and register for those events. We hope to see you there. Here's the contact information for the LCRC team. You see mine there near the bottom, H. McKinley, but please feel free to reach out to any and all of us with your questions, comments, concerns, thoughts. We're happy to hear it, and we really do value your feedback and try to use that to improve our future learning engagements and opportunities. So please feel free to shoot us a message with any of your questions or comments. And we'll do a shameless plug for our conference, which is coming up at the end of next month. We're going to be in Denver. As Carmen mentioned, Prosperity Now is going to be joining us for a couple of presentations. We're so excited that they were willing to join us the week before their conference, but they're going to be joining us in a discussion on both racial equity and also more broadly financial empowerment. So if you liked what you heard today and you want to hear some different aspects about this work, please be sure to join us for those sessions there. And also in Denver, it's going to be a great time. We have a lot of exciting opportunities and discussions and networking that's going to take place, so we hope to see you all there. And with that, that is actually going to conclude our webinar presentation for today. Thank you all so much for joining us, and have a great day.